Welcome to the REI Rookies Podcast.
The Real Estate Investing Rookies Podcast, episode number 50, where we invite you to follow us on our journey towards financial freedom using the power of real estate. I'm Josh Koth.
And I'm Jack Haas.
And here at REI Rookies, we believe in a couple key principles. Number one, the best way to retain information is by teaching it to others. And number two, a rising tide lifts all boats. We're not competitors, we're a community. So let's get into some real estate investing.
So this week we're going to tackle the subject on how to use other people's money, otherwise known as OPM.
OPM, other people's money. Now, first we need to understand why this is so important, right? Well, you have to take it back to your initial goal of why you started investing in real estate. And I'm going to generalize here, but I'm just going to use my goal, your goal, and the people that we know locally. Their goal is to have a high level of passive income. That's the pot of the gold at the end of the rainbow, right? So let's just, for round numbers, say we want to generate 10 grand a month, which is the same as making $120,000 a year gross. So in order to generate that, what do you need to have in your portfolio in real estate? I'm making some assumptions here, just to kind of use round numbers and get there. But the way we figure it is that we can make about $100 a month of cash flow for every $10,000 invested. That's kind of the returns we can typically get. So if that's the case, that multiplies out to about $1 million worth of paid for real estate or $1 million worth of equity. Whether it's that has to be the piece that's owned free and clear is about $1 million in order to spit off that much money, $10,000 a month. So not many people can write a check for $1 million worth of real estate, right? So you have to use other people's money. So that's kind of how we got there. First you start looking around, you find all your available cash. You maybe cash out some retirement. You buy properties, you're putting 20% down. You're burning through all your cash, making down payments or buying things for cash. Then eventually you run out. And chances are, for most of us, you don't have enough available cash to get to that $1 million worth of paid for real estate. So then the question is, how are you going to get to your goal? Are you going to use income from those properties you own and accumulate that to buy more? Well, for me, that strategy takes way too long. You're talking decades, right? Let's say you're halfway there, and if you're going to just use the cash flow to save up money to buy another $500,000 worth of real estate, that could take 10, 15 years, right? I mean, depending on your speed of acquisition, but that's too slow for me. So the answer is you got to use leverage. You got to use other people's money. So that's how we get to the topic.
Yeah, and what's kind of interesting about this too is that when we did have our own money to work with, we were far more loose with our purse strings, to a point where you pretty much exhaust those type of resources, and then the next thing you know, now you're forced to use other people's money in some way. So one of our primary way is to collect enough money in order to make cash offers on property.
Exactly. And it's funny because when you're spending other people's money, you got to make sure the deal is right, is a legit true deal, because you can't just go willy-nilly spending money on down payments if it's not going to produce, especially if you're having investors. So it makes you be more fiduciarily responsible, if that's a word. So that's good. I mean, in fact, there's some kind of real estate gurus out there that say, even if you have money of your own, you should learn how to utilize other people's money, because then it's going to force you to make even better deals. And then also you're not having to tap into your own resources, and your returns can almost be infinite at that point. And we'll get into some examples of how that could work. So in order to reach, our overarching goal of the 10 grand a month in passive income, we need to accumulate probably the $1 million worth of paid for real estate or $1 million worth of equity in that real estate. So if we don't have the money to write a check for that, we got to use other people's money. So what are the ways we can do that? What are some examples of other people's money?
Well, the first and obvious one would be banks, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you got to get that, establish that good relationship with your bank. And before you quit your job, make sure you get pre-qualified and get that straightened out ahead of time.
Yep, exactly. So banks, are probably the cheapest money out there of other people's money. So you want to maximize that, use as much of that as you can in order to acquire the amount of real estate it's going to take to reach your goals. So that's number one. The second one is hard money lenders. So those are people that are willing to lend money, and it's kind of between a bank and an individual. It can be an institution, but they are kind of free from some of the restraints of banks. They may not look at you as hard, but you're going to pay a higher interest rate. Honestly, we've never used a hard money lender, so we can't speak to that. Just do your research and you look in real estate investing Facebook groups and see who people recommend. It's kind of it's one of those areas that's a lot of sharks are swimming around in. So you got to definitely go in with eyes open, right?
Yeah, it can be kind of dangerous there. So be very careful with that.
Mm-hmm.
But one of our favorite things as of late is the private lender.
Right.
And what's really interesting here is you're going to hear all kinds of different gurus talking about whether you can raise that type of capital without a deal. And then you're going to find others who talk about make sure you have your deal in hand before you go try to raise the capital.
Mm-hmm.
Just talking from experience, and I think Josh and I would really agree that it is far, far easier for you to find the money if you have a genuine good deal.
Yeah, and we actually have tried both ways. And when we started out, we thought, let's raise a bunch of money, and then we can just go out and buy deals as they pop up, right? Well, turns out that's a lot harder to do, because how do you sell it to an investor? Or, sure, you can say, I'm going to give you a rate of return, but if you don't have a deal in hand, it's just not as tangible. It's not as believable. So we've had a lot more luck when we find a deal that's a true deal, and then we basically say, do you want a piece of this? If it's like a partnership type deal, or here's the property we're going to use this money for, and then maybe borrow the cash to acquire it, and then we'll do a cash out refi in the back end, or whatever our exit strategy is. If you buy it cheap enough, all things are possible, right? But having the tangible deal in front of them where they can drive by it, look at it, and they know the numbers, it just makes them more secure and more likely to, open up their wallets a little bit.
And I think it gives you a starting point to start those conversations.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about something tangible. You've run your numbers. You're confident that it is a deal. And it really comes off as a lot of gravitas there in regards to your confidence.
Yeah, exactly. You want to establish that credibility. And that comes through performance, right? Through them seeing you doing deals. And that's why, honestly, that's why we have a podcast. That's why we are involved in our local real estate meetup. We try to get in front of people face to face as much as we can and use social media, let everyone know what we're doing, because we want to establish ourselves in our market as people that are doing deals all the time. And once you have that reputation, it's not even a question, okay, these guys are going to perform. They're going to follow through on what they say. They've done it in the past. I've seen them do it for others. It's going to be no different for me. Just when you have a private lender that you're speaking with, they have to have that security, that feeling of these guys are going to actually follow through, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I don't think we have it in our notes here, Josh, but we should probably talk about, you already mentioned that you got to get in front of some people so that you can find some of these private lenders. But let's go through a couple of examples as to how to get in front of some of these people. And we always keep talking about our local real estate investing group,
Mm-hmm.
but we're also members of Master Networks. So we're both in different chapters that we're talking to on a regular basis.
Yep. Any of those local networking groups. I'm in one called Inspire Networkers too. That's more of a local version of a networking group. Get in front of as many people as you can per week, right? And just tell everyone what you do. And it's going to make it a lot easier. Also, just think about who do you know that might have a high net worth or might have some cash sitting on the sidelines, maybe a slightly older individual who's accumulated some money over their lives, and they are probably not getting a great rate of return on that money. And the key thing to remember is that you're the one that has the thing of value. You're the one that is bringing either a profit, if you're going to do like a partnership where you split the profits, or give them a higher rate of return than they're getting. You're the one with the deal, with the precious diamond, right? So they should be chasing you, asking to be a part of that, rather than you with your hand out begging for money. You have to make sure you get your mindset right and flip that switch in your head that you're the one that has a thing of value. Because if they could put their money somewhere else and make more, they would, right? So you're giving them that ability to make a higher rate of return.
Yeah, that is a big mindset shift. If you have some friends and family in your life and you're not sharing what you're doing, I mean, and I'm going to even go a step further. You shouldn't assume the wealth of anybody around you. You would be surprised at who might be sitting on money that isn't being utilized in some way. So make sure you let everybody know that you do real estate investing.
And just think, if they have their money saving in a CD or something, let's say they're real conservative financial people and their money's in a CD getting 1% or 2% or less, and you have the ability to double, triple that, quadruple that possibly. Every market's different, every situation's different, but to increase their rate of return significantly, and they trust you, that's the important thing too. And that's why it's so crucial to make sure you take care of these relationships. You need to be able to perform on the deal as stated. So if you tell somebody, you're going to pay them back in a month, 6 months, a year, whatever the terms of the deal you make, you need to make that deadline or earlier. If you can exceed that deadline, even better, because they're going to be like, wow, they're going to be impressed that you made it happen even quicker than you stated. And let's say you predicted a certain rate of return. If you could exceed that a little bit too, give them a little bit more, they're going to be that much more likely to just turn right around and say, hey, keep the money in the game. Let's just let it ride, find another deal. They're going to kind of get addicted to those returns, and they're going to want to just keep the money rolling.
Yeah, I can't echo that enough. The concept that, and we typically do that as a target. If there is any kind of private money involved, we either try to return the money sooner than expected, and or exceed their expectations in their return.
Right. And then you need to know what type of personality they are too. Do you need to be in constant communication with them or not? Some people they're nervous when their money's out. So you got to keep them, calm, talk them off the ledge every so often, and make sure they know their money's safe and yep, everything's on track. You're going to get it back, maybe even a little bit early. That's the best thing. You got to know your personalities too. And remember, real estate is a people game. So you got to treat it as such. And another untapped resources besides private lenders is a seller of a property, right? Now, if you're a real estate investor, you're constantly interacting with sellers of off-market properties. If you're doing any type of bandit signs, direct mail, any marketing beyond the MLS, you're going to be talking directly to sellers. Well, guess what? A lot of those sellers might be in a position where they could sell their house to you using seller financing. And that's a great untapped resource of other people's money. We've had situations where we just say, how about we just start making you payments? Not even a down payment, just how about we start making you payments? Well, that saves us the trouble of having to go raise capital to acquire this property. You skip a bunch of steps and you're in possession of the property with some minimal paperwork. And as long as the deal is a win-win for everybody, they might like that passive income that you're going to produce for them without having to hassle with the property at all. Let's say maybe they're a aging landlord, they want to retire, but they like the passive income. They don't want to cash out and get a big capital gains some tax consequences. It's an option. So always make it part of your offer process when you're possibly submitting a lowball cash offer, or what we call a profitable cash offer. Give them the option of a seller finance option as well, maybe a little bit closer to their price. And one way you can do that, and I saw this in a real estate group, this quote was really well worded, I thought. So I'm going to just say it here. It says, sure, I can certainly pay that price. This is if someone counters, like let's say you give a lowball cash price and they counter a little bit higher. You say, sure, I can certainly pay that price, but that wouldn't be an all cash price. If I were to pay that price, it would need to be under the following terms. Then you list those. Would that be acceptable, or would you prefer all cash now? Then instead of them saying no, yes or no to your all cash offer, you're saying, which of these options do you like better? And when presented with two choices to choose from, a lot of times they forget there's a third option of just saying no, which, it just gives you that much more edge, a little bit more higher chance of getting towards a deal.
Yeah. So, just like we've learned in the past, you don't assume the mindset of a seller. You don't assume the motivation of a seller, and you don't assume the motivation and mindset of an investor.
Right.
You don't know what they are thinking is worth it.
Mm-hmm.
This, like, when you're talking to a private investor, you're not the one proposing the terms. You let them start that part of the discussion.
Just in case they'd be happy with a rate of return lower than you were prepared to pay. Great. Then there's even more meat on the bones, and makes it even a better deal for you. So, and if they're still happy with the rate of return they're getting, it's a win-win. So that's why, same reason we always try to get sellers to give us a price first, what they're asking for, because you never know, it might be lower than we were even going to offer. And if that's the case, I'd hate to offer more than they would have taken. So one exercise that's important to learn how to do is, when you're speaking to sellers, think of ways that you could structure a deal. Let's say they want $100,000 for their house. Let's say you're willing to pay $75,000 as a lowball cash offer. They want 100. Well, could you pay 100? A lot of times people will just say, no, I can't. That's too much money for that property. Well, if it cash flows during the entire time of the term of the agreement, who cares, right? I mean, the whole goal is to pick up passive income, cash flowing properties. So as long as your payment is low enough, it almost doesn't matter what you pay ultimately for the property if it's cash flowing the whole time. So think of ways you could structure that deal. And how we figured this out is, let's say the place rents for $1,000. We typically figure debt service is going to be around 40% of that. So any scenario where your payment to the seller is $400 or less, that property is probably going to cash flow. So here's a couple of examples of ways you could structure that. $20,000 down, $80,000 carried for 20 years at 3% with a payment of $379. That works. If you happen to have the $20,000 down, maybe even borrowed it, that would work. Let's say you don't have that much money on hand. $5,000 down, $95,000 carried for 30 years at 5%. That's payment of $454. A little high, but it's getting close. I mean, you could play with those terms and get under the 400. You can stretch it out to 35, 40 years. Maybe reduce the purchase price slightly. Another example, $2,000 down, $98,000 carried for 5 years at 5% with a balloon payment of $413. So right in the line. Here's another one. $0 down, interest only payments of $400 for 10 years, balloon of $100,000 due at the end. I mean, that's wacky, right? But it could work. No money out of pocket. It cash flows the entire time you own it. And at the end of the 10 years, chances are it would have appreciated to the point where you could probably just do a cash out refi, throw a mortgage on it and refi the seller out, and you're good. You got into the property with no money and it cash flowed the entire time. Another example would be $0 down, principal only payments of $400 for 250 payments. That's 20.8 years, basically $400 a month until it's paid off. That just works out to be 250 payments. And again, you don't want to negotiate on their behalf. So don't sit here and think no one would ever take that, because sometimes people will. They just like the cash flow. If they're saying, hey, I'd get rid of this problem property, I'm sick of these tenants, I'm still going to get $400 a month, and you're going to take care of everything else. I mean, there's people out there that will take that deal.
And don't undervalue your reputation and building that rapport, because like Josh said, we're not going to negotiate on their behalf. We're going to just present them with 2 or 3 options, let them choose. And if they like you, that's just as much of a value there as anything else.
Yeah. And we'll get into, in fact, we should do a whole episode on just speaking to sellers, because this numbers talk is typically the last 5% of your conversation. The other 95% is building rapport and just being nice and talking about the weather and, small talk. And by the time you get to the numbers, you already have a great relationship with them if you're doing it right. And I've had sellers say things like, this other guy was going to give me 20,000 more, but I didn't like him. I like you. I mean, they literally say things like that. And that demonstrates how important the ability to build rapport is. And I mean, it's everything.
So in the end, let's wrap this up in a nutshell. Josh.
Yeah. So basically the only way you're going to get to your goal, unless you have $1 million laying around in the bank to write a check to pay for $1 million worth of real estate. The only way you're going to get there is by the use of leverage, using other people's money. So it's an important skill to develop and figure out ways you can structure deals, figure out all the options out there of using other people's money and pursuing them all and getting good at them all until you reach your goal.
Yeah, this kind of reminds me, and we talked about this earlier, part of the Millionaire Real Estate Investor by Williams.
Gary Keller. Yep.
Gary Keller. Gary Keller, where he talks about
this book right here.
In order to earn $1 million, you need to first buy $1 million, and then own $1 million, and then earn $1 million.
All right. So acquisition is always your first. Well, and actually, the first part is think a million, right? I think like a millionaire. So mindset, as we've stated many times, is so crucial. But then the phase we're in is the acquisition phase. So that's where we're aggressively, and that's where most people are going to be. That's where, all the progress is made is during the acquisition. And it's a lot easier to rearrange debt and, arrange things, mortgages and things and balloon payments and everything else. It's a lot easier to rearrange that on things you already own than it is to find another true deal out there. So if you can acquire things and make it happen through the use of all these creative ways of using other people's money, you want to put all these to work.
So, and then with that, we'll move on to the Coach's Corner, and you had some information from the Rich Dad Network, right?
Yeah, basically, Robert Kiyosaki, I think he wrote a book called OPM, Other People's Money, but I posted a link, and we'll put it in the show notes here, to a blog post about the fundamental, Rich Dad Fundamentals, OPM, Other People's Money. And let's read a little quote from it here. It says, OPM is a fundamental concept of Rich Dad and a sign of high financial intelligence. By using both good debt and OPM, you can dramatically increase your return on investment, and you can achieve infinite returns. You can even achieve infinite returns. I mean, there you go.
Yeah, we just take a second about the infinite returns. When you acquire a property with all cash, and then you can extract every penny that you put into it. Now you're holding a property without any money out of your pocket. I don't think there's a better high.
That's right. Very crucial. Very good.
So, as always, if you have any questions or thoughts for us, please shoot us an email at info@reirookies.com.
Shoot it on over to iTunes and subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. Look us up on Facebook or Twitter at REI Rookies. If you like what you're hearing, give us a 5-star review. It really helps other rookie investors out there find the show.
And remember, get off the bench.
And get into the game. We'll see you next time.